Goeiedag and welcome! My name is Emma Reinske and today I will be doing a books that left an impression on me English and German edition. This and the previous video were inspired by Jay from Captured in Words, because I saw his video and thought, well, I can do that too, but in two parts, because I have more than a couple of books that left an impression on me. So let's start with the English books. The first one will actually be Utopia by Thomas More, and I lent out that book to a friend of mine, so I don't have it here, but it let me think really a lot about what he envisioned as a utopia and what did and did not work, because some of the things that he described have been tried, and I thought directly, well, we have done that and it did not work. So I'm lucky and happy that it did not all work out that way. Some things were just plain creepy, like women having to be standing naked in the street so they can be honestly chosen as a wife, as if women don't have any rights or something like that. That was pretty creepy. It was also quite a dense book, but it was a very deep read. So now I go on with the next one, which is one of the sci-fi classics, The Time Machine. Because this left an impression because I, as of yet, have not read a lot of sci-fi. I have read quite a few fantasy books, but not a lot of sci-fi. And the reason why this left an impression was the fact that it has been written quite a while ago, and it showed some of the things we have now that are to be right, and just some very creepy things like a broken down moon and a decline of the humans, which was not only creepy, but in some way it seemed as if it actually is possible, which makes it even more of a thing you want and go on thinking about. But now, on a more positive book, I have here The Obsidian Throne by J.D. Oswald. This is part 5 in a high fantasy series called The Ballad of Sir Benfro. It also says here on the top of the book. This was one of my favorite books of last year, and that's because the fact that this whole fantasy world is very understandable. The way that the world building works is that at the start of every chapter there is like a little bit of a prophecy or history or how the magic system works in the beginning of the chapter, and that part has to do with the upcoming chapter and sometimes also with one or two chapters ahead, which is very interesting. You learn about the people, about the dragons, because one of the main characters is a dragon, and the magic system, which is based on ley lines. And you learn a lot about that just through reading, which is quite logical because a whole bunch of the characters actually already know how the magic system works. So it would be a waste to explain it to everyone all the time. And it is also the case that a couple of the main characters have sort of lessons in magic for 1 or 2 years, but those years are skipped. And to retell all those things again would be quite illogical, so we get them separate from the story, which is nice. The ending was wrapped up very well. It was satisfying and left, in my opinion, without any major, if any, plot holes, which you hardly ever see. A lot of the books actually have a bunch of plot holes at the end. For this series, not so many. Then we have The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, which is a classic that a lot of people already know, and the fact that beauty would show if a person was honest or good or not was actually true in that society, and the fact that Dorian sells his soul to the devil and what happens to the painting. This is a horror book that left me thinking about how important our exterior actually is to society and how important we make our looks be, which sometimes is quite disturbing because they should not be that important, but they are. So it left me thinking about that, and just the fact that I really like the story, which I did not really expect when I started reading it. I started reading it because a school play was coming up that was mandatory to us about this book, and I just wanted to read the book too. I also have watched the movie a couple of times, but the book is a lot better, and the movie has like set flaws and inconsistencies, which is a lot less nice. Then we have the historical fiction Dances with Wolves by Michael Blake, which I don't know how accurate the representation of the frontier is in this book, but it learned me about coming into your own skin and how that can feel. How a person can feel at home at a place where they don't expect to feel at home. It is even that I liked this book so much when I read it that I recommended it to classmates who had trouble properly reading English, and they enjoyed it too. So they came to me for more book recommendations for several language classes because they liked the same books I liked, and that made me feel good. So I was already doing it back then. And then we have one of the first literary fictions, I think it is literary fiction, definitely magical realism that I ever read. This is The Stolen Child by Keith Donoghue. Firstly, I read the first time I read this was in Dutch because I just came across it in a library and it sounded interesting. It's about a boy that gets taken by hobgoblins and changed up by one of the hobgoblins that has been in that crew for about 100 years. And both are trying to find out who they are and who they were before the change, which is really an interesting plot point, since it left such an impression on me and I really liked the story when I first read it. I decided to go on and read the book in its original English language. And I spent an entire night finishing the book, which I hardly ever do. But it says something about the fact that this book, that I really like it, and the second time I read it, it also made me think a lot about what is important to our identity and our search for who we are, and that it will come with time. Because at a certain point in this book, they slowly find out who they are or who they were, and it is actually very interesting to read and just a curious exhibition, so I liked it. Then we have a whole book series that I did not want to take out of its box set, which is The Chronicles of Narnia. I read this for the first time when I was 20, and like I said in my Dutch books video, it has a lot of philosophical undertones and Christian undertones in it. It is also considered, at least in part, Christian fiction, because this is written by a Christian author, and Aslan is supposed to be a representation of our god, which is also insinuated in one of the books. I believe The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is very interesting to read, and it made me think about like more philosophers and what I recognized from classes and what I recognized from the Bible, and just in general it is a fun story to read. A nice middle grade story that's also a lot of fun to read when you're an adult, which is what I did. And now I have only 3 books left. One is one I finished quite recently, which is the last one, a psychological thriller and suspense novel about a woman that decides, as one last adventure in her life before settling down and starting a family, which she actually doesn't want to do, to just take part in reality television show about survival, but the show takes on a much darker turn than everybody expects. And to know what happens, just read the book. But I found the undertones about like what being alone for a longer amount of time can do with you, with your brain, and what context has to do with the way you think. It was very interesting, and also the undertones about healthy eating and stuff in this book were very... It was not very obvious all the time because I'm not from America and American food brands and stuff were used, so I could not pick up all the things. But a lot of stuff is happening in here, and I think the most creepy thing is that we have a chance that something that happened in this book will actually happen on this world not too long from now. And I'm not going to say what that is because I don't want to spoil the book if you want to read it. And now we go into my final books, which are 2 German books. First I do the series Die Stoomkönige by Kai Meijer. I read this year, an audiobook with the physical books next to it. And it was actually an amazing, fantastical read. A retelling of parts of the 1001 Nights story. And it was very fascinating because it is well done. It has not a focus on romance, even though it is a YA book, which is actually something I really liked about it. And also the main characters are all around 20 years old and way more serious because what's troubling this world, it comes out, it also has, it seems to have a bit of philosophical undertones in it too, but it might just be because that's what fit the original 1001 Nights stories. Well, I really enjoyed these books, and as soon as I have time, I think I might reread them and enjoy them again. Because it is definitely not a difficult German book to read if you are a little bit into German. I don't know if the people who are watching this are, but I know this one has not been translated into English, which is a shame because the books are actually very, very good, and it is highly deserving of a translation. And then we have the last book, which is Robert Schneider's Slavas Buddha, a book about a very talented boy that is being born in somewhere, I believe, a mountain village or something, who can play the organ very, very, very well. He hears a song and he can play it back almost at once. And a lot of more things are happening in this book. This is one of the first German books I read in school, and it left an impression because the story is built so well, and it was for once not a book based on romance, because all the books in the school we could choose from were cheesy YA German novels that did not interest me in the slightest, which was a shame because I don't think that is absolutely necessary at all, because there are good books in other genres too. There was no fantasy to find, there was no contemporary to find that did not include any romance except for Goethe in its old glory. And with that, what I mean with that is the original writings of Goethe, which is about like 200 years ago or so. I don't know when he lived, but I could not understand that thing. So this book was a welcome chance next to Asterix and Obelix German edition. It left an impression because the story ends on a very, very sad note. I still remember. It's a long time ago I read it, and I want to reread it, like with a lot of the books I showed in these videos, because the books are good and left an impression. And there is more. This is quite a sad book, but I found it very interesting to read, so I hope I will find time sometime to reread it. But this was the last book I had to show you in my Dutch German, or in this video. This is it for now, and on to the keer!